Sadhana Dalita Sri Vishakhanitanushtam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sadhana Dalita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaurabhakta Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaurabhakta Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaurabhakta
Hare Krishna, dear devotees, Dandot Pranams, please accept my humble obeisances and your lotus feet. Today we welcome all of you for the today's morning program Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. And today we'll be playing the recorded lecture of His Grace Mukunda Prabhu. And I just short introduction. So His Grace Mukunda Datta Prabhu is an initiated disciple of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada and he joined ISKCON 40 plus years ago, deeply impressed by the comprehensive, authentic, and nectarian presentation of the science of Krishna Bhakti, love of God. He has clearly explained in the books by Srila Prabhupada. Noted for his kirtan, devotional singing, he has received formal training in North Indian classic music, sings and plays instruments in traditional Bengali style of kirtan, and has made several recordings of the Gaudiya Vaishnava traditions, Sanskrit and vernacular hymns. Currently, he serves as a Sanskrit or English translator and editor for the book Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. Also, a scholar of Sanskrit, Hindi, and other Indic languages, he served as a member of Shastric Advisory Council to the ISKCON Governing Body Commission. He has traveled widely, lecturing for many years on Vedic literature such as Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So, let me play the recorded lecture of His Grace.
Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashta Prayeshwa Bhadresho Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishne Swadhamo Pagate Dharmagnanadibhi saha Kalau nashtatrisham esha Puranarko dhunodita Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. This is Canto 5, Chapter 10, entitled Maharaj Rahugana Meets Jada Bharat. And we're on text number 15 today, which is another prose text. And I will read that. Sachapi Pandaveya Sindhu Sauvirapatis Tattva Jignasayam Samyak Shraddhayadhikratadhikaras Tadhridaya Granthi Mochanam Dujavacha Ashrutya Bahu Yoga Grantha Sammatam Tvaraya Avaruhya Shirasa Padamulam Upasritaha Kshamapayan Vigata Devasmaya Uvacha. That means, Shukdev Goswami continued, O best of the Pandu dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, the king of the Sindhu and Sauvira states, Maharaj Rahugana, had great faith in discussions of the absolute truth. Being thus qualified, he heard from Jadabharata that philosophical presentation which is approved by all scriptures on the mystic yoga process, which slackens the knot in the heart. His material conception of himself as a king was thus destroyed. He immediately descended from his palanquin and fell flat on the ground with his head at the lotus feet of Jadabharata, in such a way that he might be excused for his insulting words against the great Brahmana. Then he prayed as follows. Kindly repeat. Shukdev Goswami continued. O best of the Pandu dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, the king of the Sindhu and Sauvira states, Maharaj Rahugana, had great faith in discussions of the absolute truth. Being thus qualified, he heard from Jadabharata that philosophical presentation which is approved by all scriptures on the mystic yoga process, which slackens the knot in the heart. His material conception of himself as a king was thus destroyed. He immediately descended from his palanquin and fell flat on the ground with his head at the lotus feet of Jadabharata, in such a way that he might be excused for his insulting words against the great Brahmana. He then prayed as follows. So Srila Prabhupada has given a very nice purport here. We'll read that. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, text 2, Lord Krishna says, Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sakale neha mahata yogo nashra parantapa. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science, as it is, appears to be lost. Through the disciplic succession, the royal order was on the same platform as great saintly persons, Raja Rishis. Formerly, they could understand the philosophy of life and knew how to train the citizens to come to the same standard. In other words, they knew how to deliver the citizens from the entanglement of birth and death. When Maharaj Dasharatha ruled Ayodhya, the great sage Vishwamitra once came to him to take away Lord Ramchandra and Lakshman to the forest to kill a demon. When the saintly person Vishwamitra came to the court of Maharaj Dasharatha, the king, in order to receive the saintly person, asked him, Aihishtam yattat punarjanma jayaya. He asked the sage whether everything was going on well in his endeavor to conquer the repetition of birth and death. The whole process of Vedic civilization is based on this point. We must know how to conquer the repetition of birth and death. Maharaj Rahugana also knew the purpose of life. Therefore, when Jadabharata put the philosophy of life before him, he immediately appreciated it. This is the foundation of Vedic society. Learned scholars, brahmanas, saintly persons, and sages who were fully aware of the Vedic purpose advised the royal order how to benefit the general masses. And by their cooperation, the general masses were benefited. Therefore, everything was successful. Maharaj Rahugana attained this perfection of understanding the value of human life. Therefore, he regretted his insulting words to Jadabharata, and he immediately descended from his palanquin and fell down at the lotus feet of Jadabharata in order to be excused, and to hear from him further about the values of life known as Brahma Jignasa, inquiry into the absolute truth. At the present moment, high government officials are ignorant of the values of life. And when saintly persons endeavor to broadcast the Vedic knowledge, the so-called executives do not offer their respectful obeisances, but try to obstruct the spiritual propaganda. Thus, one can say that the former kingly government was like heaven, and that the present government is like hell. Om Gnana Timaranthasya Gnananjana Shilakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pankum Lankhayate Girim Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam. O best of the Pandu dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, the king of the Sindhu and Sauvira states, Maharaj Rahugana had great faith in discussions of the absolute truth. Being thus qualified, he heard from Jadabharat that philosophical presentation which is approved by all scriptures on the mystic yoga process, which slackens the knot in the heart. His material conception of himself as king was thus destroyed. He immediately descended from his palanquin and fell flat on the ground with his head at the lotus feet of Jadabharata in such a way that he might be excused for his insulting words against the great Brahmana. He then prayed as follows. So the first thing, it would seem, that Srila Prabhupada points out is that this is not a new situation here. This is the standard process of receiving Vedic knowledge. A saintly king who appreciates that knowledge to begin with, because that appreciation has to be there, first and foremost. And such a king, if he governs in terms of the directions given by great saintly persons, brahmanas, rishis, devotees, like Jadabharata here in this verse, then he can achieve the perfection of his own life, and he can also benefit those who are in his care. Evam parampara praptam. This is quite clear. Prabhupada quotes this verse. So through the disciplic succession, the royal order was on the same platform as great saintly persons. They're called Raja Rishis. Although they're Rajas, they're also Rishis. Nowadays we don't get even Rajas. We don't get Rishis nor Rajas. So that's why things are topsy-turvy. But formerly, Prabhupada writes, formerly they could understand the philosophy of life and knew how to train the citizens to come to the same standard. That's quite a sentence. Formerly they could understand the philosophy of life and knew how to train the citizens to come to the same standard. This is the whole key. For those who are administrators, this is the whole key. Now, Prabhupada goes on. In other words, they knew how to deliver the citizens from the entanglement of birth and death. Maharaj Rahugana was a great saintly king himself. Therefore, he appreciated Jadabharata. Now, Jadabharata was also a great saintly king, but he wasn't acting as that in this particular incarnation. We know the story. He was so careful, and he had learned his lesson so well about his previous mistakes that he was determined not to get involved in anything as much as possible. He was avadhuta. In fact, I think the word is used here in several verses, avadhuta. But he knew how to deliver the citizens from the entanglement of birth and death. And this is an instruction that was given by his own predecessor, isn't it? Anybody know what I'm thinking? Patishasyan. What is that verse? Yeah. Third line. Jananis nasasyat. Yeah, namochayed yasamapeta martyam. But one should not become a pati. Here the word is used. Sindhu Sauvira pati. Maharaj Rahugana was the king. Pati means lord. It also means husband. It also means king. Either way. Here it's Sovirapati, Sindhupati. What is this Sindhu and Sovira? Does anybody know? Where is this? It's modern-day Pakistan. Just see how things change. This is the effect of the time factor. Previously, in that quarter, we had kings like Maharaj Rahugana, and Jadabharata was wandering around in that area as well, and just happened to come in contact with his king, and transmission of spiritual knowledge took place that was significant enough to be recorded here in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The key here is one should not become such a king unless he can deliver his dependents. So actually Maharaj Rahugana was like that, but because of the material entanglement, we can assume that is characteristic of kshatriyas, administrators, managers, politicians, soldiers. They have what Krishna describes in Bhagavad Gita as Ishvara Bhava. What does Ishvara Bhava mean? They think they're the Lord. Yeah, so the Ishvara in this sense, Pati is the same thing. So, this is the idea. One should not become such a Pati unless he can deliver his dependents. For the king, the dependent is the citizens. For a husband, the dependent is the family, wife and children. For the Lord, the dependent is everyone. This is to the extent that one wants to become Ishvara, he has to have the potency to deliver those who depend upon him. This is the definition. What is it? Ego bahunam yo vidadhati kaman. The Shruti mantra says. One actually has to satisfy these dependents, and it's not always a very easy thing to do. So, that's one thing. Maharaj Rahugana was in this line, and certainly Jadabharata was also in this line. His own forefather, Rishabhadev, had spoken that verse, so he knew these things very well. Now, the second thing that Srila Prabhupada points out here is he mentions this, something that I've heard him say in many other lectures as well. When Maharaj Dasharatha ruled Ayodhya, Vishwamitra came to take away his sons to go and kill the demons. And the first thing Maharaj Dasharatha was inquiring by way of greeting him was, Ahishtam yattat punarjanma jayaya. How is your effort to conquer birth and death going? In other words, it was such a prominent understanding in that social milieu that Maharaj Dasharatha saw nothing odd about inquiring from this Brahman, from this sage in that way. And Prabhupada sees the significance of this as that this is the whole process of Vedic civilization. The entire purpose of life is to conquer birth and death. There are certain passages or certain statements in the scripture that seem to strike us, or that seem to strike Srila Prabhupada. This is one of them because he repeats it quite a bit throughout his books. Another one is, for example, the commentary of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur on the second chapter, Vyavasayatmika Buddhi verse. That really made a profound impression on Srila Prabhupada. So when I was seeing this, when I was reading this, it made me think of a similar statement in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1, text number 9. Duryodhana is speaking, and he says that all these men, he's referring to all of his men, his soldiers, his fallible soldiers, as it turned out. He said they're all tyakta jivita. What does that mean? They've all given up their lives for my sake. Mad arthe tyakta jivita. And I was thinking about this. If these men were able to give up their lives for someone like Duryodhana, then why can't we give up our lives for the sake of our spiritual master? Something to think about. Anyway, every once in a while a very poignant statement will come up, and evidently Srila Prabhupada thinks this is very important because he says this. One must know how to conquer the repetition of birth and death. This is really the thing that defines human life as opposed to animal life. Dharmasya hina pashubhi samana. Without this sense of what dharma is and what advancement in human life is, then one is really not different from an animal. Human beings are not biologically defined. Humanity is defined in terms of one's acceptance, one's application of dharma. That's what defines a human being, not your biological status. So he asked the sage whether everything was going on well in his endeavor to conquer the repetition of birth and death. The whole process of Vedic civilization is based on this point. We must know how to conquer the repetition of birth and death. Now, the third thing here is Maharaj Rahugana knew this purpose of life. Therefore, when Jadabharata put the philosophy of life before him, he immediately appreciated it. This is the foundation of Vedic society. We said in the beginning, it doesn't work if you have qualified brahmanas. You also have to have qualified administrators who appreciate those brahmanas. You also have to have qualified vaishyas who facilitate both of those higher classes. You also have to have the very bedrock of the society, at least in terms of mundane necessities, who are the Shudras. They're all dependent. Prabhupada very often explains it's like the body. Even though the head, you can do without maybe one limb or even two limbs. Some people don't have any limbs. But you cannot do without your head. So just because the head is more important, it doesn't mean that the head is not concerned about the other limbs. This is, in fact, one of the symptoms of the truly Brahman-realized person. He does care about the others. He cares. Because he has empathy. Atmaupamyena sarvata samam pashiti arjuna sukham va yadi va dukham sa yogi paramomata, Krishna says. He's the best yogi. So everyone is important. Everyone has his place, but they have different places. And this is also important to understand. When we accept Vedic wisdom from saintly persons such as Vishwamitra or Jadabharata, or even from saintly kings like Maharaj Bharata or Maharaj Rahugana and others, Dasharatha, etc., then we can appreciate this point, that human life is actually meant for everyone's self-realization. And it's meant to advance everyone, and everyone has a different function to perform, but they're equally important, although they're not the same absolutely. This is the Kevaladvaita idea that Prabhupada so often smashes throughout his books, lectures, and conversations. Artificial oneness is to be eliminated, but an appreciation of spiritual oneness is something that's absolutely necessary. And Prabhupada goes so far as to say here that the whole process of Vedic civilization is based on this point. One has to understand the boon that human life offers him, which is to attain this spiritual realization. What is that spiritual realization? Brahma bhuta prasannatma nashochiti nakangshiti sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labhate. Krishna says that one understands the nature of spirit. He identifies with that spirit. He becomes joyful because that is the nature of that spirit. He no longer laments. He no longer hankers or envies anyone else. He's no longer whining about his fate. What is it? Third line? Samasarveshu bhuteshu. He sees all living beings equally, therefore. The rest of us see different living entity in different bodies. If the body is different, we assume the living entity is also different. But the person who's spiritually realized doesn't think like this. So, this is another point. Everything is successful when people have the spiritual wisdom to appreciate their unique individuality as well as the spiritual equality at the same time. On the mundane level, everything is different, and on the spiritual level, everything is similar. So Maharaj Rahugana attained this perfection of understanding the value of human life. Therefore, he regretted his insulting words to Jadabharata. And he immediately descended from his palanquin and fell down at the lotus feet of Jadabharata in order to be excused and to hear from him further about the values of life known as Brahma Jigyasa, inquiry into the absolute truth. This is something that Sridhar Swami has commented on this verse. He's about the only Acharya who's really commented at length, at least in our line. And he says that he attained adhikar. Here the word is used, adhikrita adhikara. He attained the proper qualification for that. And what is that? Here it's called tattva jignasayam. In the matter of tattva jignasa, Sridhar Swami qualifies what this means. It's really brahma jignasa, understanding the absolute truth. So he got good faith, samyak shraddha. And what is the nature of this faith, and what is the nature of the instructions that were given by Jadabharata to Maharaj Rahugana? Hridaya granthi mojanam. These instructions were able to slash the knot within the heart, to free one from the knot within the heart, which is this false ego that impels us to identify with matter, to become entangled in karma, and to suffer the consequences birth after birth. That's the significance of this idea, punarjanma jayaya. Human life is meant for conquering over repeated birth and death. So, what those words have further been described here as Bahu Yoga Grantha Sammatam. They're approved in many scriptures on yoga. Now, we're not talking about pure devotional service here, it would seem. This is all pretty generic spiritual knowledge. Even nowadays, whatever spiritual realization exists in the far north of India, they're mostly impersonalists. And this is pretty much, there's no explicit mention of bhakti here. But still, these things are all important because this is at least the substrate of bhakti, the foundation of bhakti. Now, Maharaj Rahugana, he has appreciated this, and Prabhupada has put it very gently here in his purport, but the Acharyas in their commentaries have stated very unequivocally that, to put it in colloquial terms, Maharaj Rahugana had his mind blown by the instructions of Jadabharat, and he was, it said, here we have Vigata Nripa Deva Smaya. Smaya means, anybody know what the word smaya means? Prabhupada translates it here as pride, false pride. He gave up the false pride of being the Nripa Deva, the god of the people. A king is sometimes called Naradeva because he's the god of the people, as it were. Especially in Far Eastern cultures, they make that very explicit. And a Brahmana is called a Bhudeva. Similarly, he's the god of the whole world. God's walking on the earth, as it were. So this is, in the Kshatriya especially, who already has a little bit of weakness towards the Ishvara Bhava, this produces a mountain of pride. And this, the word, I think it was both Sridhar Swami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur used the word garva instead of smaya. Smaya actually doesn't usually mean pride, it means to smile. In fact, according to the dictionary, our English word smile is actually coming from the same root in Sanskrit, which is smith, to smile. So smaya. We can picture someone who's proud of himself. He has this chuffed smile on his face. So this was what was destroyed in Maharaj Rahugana when he heard this phenomenal teachings coming from Jadabharata that we've been hearing in the last few verses. Obviously a very thoughtful palanquin carrier here. Atypical palanquin carrier, not your ordinary Shudra. So Maharaj Rahugana was quite shocked, and he got down and he bowed on the ground, even the great king. Now, Jadabharata had already spoken so many things, but Prabhupada indicates here that Maharaj Rahugana was eager to hear more. This just goes to further illustrate how much appreciation he had for the real value of human life in the realm of Brahma Jignasa, inquiring into the absolute truth. And maybe it's in another verse. Yes, it's in the next verse. This verse, the famous verse from the Upanishads. Tad vijnanartham sagurume madhigachet samit pani shrotriyam brahmanishtam. One has to approach a guru to understand the purpose of life, what is the absolute truth. This is what he's doing, in effect, here. When we see someone has this spiritual realization, it's our duty to surrender and to hear, or at least inquire in this way. So Maharaj Rahugan is setting that example as well for future kings, for his descendants and other kings who may be reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, finally, Srila Prabhupada concludes his purport. He says, at the present moment, here comes the contrast. At the present moment, high government officials are ignorant of the values of life, and when saintly persons endeavor to broadcast the Vedic knowledge to the so-called executives, what should they be executing? They should be executing the tenets of Shastra, or at least executing something that's going to bring someone to spiritual realization. So Prabhupada is not using the word executives lightly either. So-called executives do not offer their respectful obeisances, but try to obstruct the spiritual propaganda. This is a problem. And even in India, I should even go so far as to say, especially in India, this is a problem, because the Indians really should know better. And they, in fact, do know better, but they're working very hard, as fast as they possibly can, to sweep all vestiges of Vedic culture and knowledge out of the door. They just don't want it in the way. And this is an unfortunate situation in the Western countries already. They've swept it out long ago, and so everyone suffers. And therefore, Prabhupada, his periodic sentence here, thus one can say that the former kingly government was like heaven and that the present government is like hell, period. Certainly that is the case in the Sindhu and Sovira province that we're talking about, because now if you just appear on the street there wearing a dhoti and tilak, you will probably be murdered, especially if you're American and furthermore from Jewish background. Vasu Ghosh was joking like this, because some years ago they had some threat in ISKCON Gujarat that there was a possible terrorist attack being planned. And Vasu Ghosh said that if you're an ISKCON devotee, you can be American, Hindu, and Jew all at the same time. So they really like to kill you. Anyway, this is the sorry state of Pakistan in the present day and age. This is formerly the province of Maharaj Rahugana, who was enlightened in this way by Jadabharata. But the point is that these are absolute principles. They're applicable even here in California to one extent or another. And we need to hear about these things on a regular basis because it's important that someone act on this. I'll stop here. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Archita Prabhu.
In spite of the danger, there are devotees preaching there.
Yeah.
I've been getting regular emails from a young man he's a paraplegic, he's Pakistani, and he was born in a Muslim family. But not only is he now preaching bhakti openly and getting beat up and arrested for it, but he has created a website against Islam, saying that the current state of Islam is actually murderous, treacherous, etc. I mean, this guy's fearless. Totally fearless.
Yeah. I don't know how diplomatic that is, or strategic it is, but at least we can say he's Abhayacharana. Yeah, there are devotees. There's Urdu Gitas there, and there are devotees who have dedicated themselves to preaching undercover, not only in Pakistan. I mean, Pakistan is perhaps the epicenter of, Islamic hatred, if you will, but in other Arabic countries as well. I mean, we don't really want to cultivate any anti-Islamic sentiments. We're not against any religion, but certainly everybody can benefit from hearing the light of the Bhagavata, right? It's here just for that purpose. So, and I, at least personally, I have faith that because this devotional service was practiced so long in that area, somehow or other, even though they've covered it up, there's still something underneath. I mean, we know, according to the absolute truth, everybody always has this in any country. Any sinful person can be purified by the innate potency of bhakti, and certainly in Pakistan as well, and other places. But Prabhupada, one of the points that he's making here in this purport is that there has to be very clear cooperation between especially the saintly class, the intellectuals, priests, and the executives, managers, politicians, government. That's very, very important because they're so influential on the mass of people in general. So those are some things we can learn as well. Someone, I think it was maybe Burke Roquefort, did a survey and he found that Srila Prabhupada gave perhaps 80% of his instructions on Varnashram Dharma in the last 3 years that he was with us, which suggests that through his own experience he was increasingly seeing the value of this sort of social system, even in his own society, what to speak of in the society in general. So these are all important points. Anything else? Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
The world, this is Vaninath Prabhu, the best cook in all Nutwarka. Can you please tell us how you became that great?
Krishna dear devotees. Let me summarize just whatever I noted down. So how Prabhu started with how the saintly kings, they used to receive the Vedic knowledge from the rishis, and even though they were kings, but they were called as Rajarshis because they know the philosophy behind this human life, and they could understand the philosophy of life, and they used to train the citizens also to come to the same standard of life. So then, like, one should not become pati, whether it is a king, different meanings, king, husband, or lord. So unless they deliver their dependents, so the dependents become like different kings. For the kings, the dependents are the citizens. For the husband, it is the wife and children, and for the lord, all the jivas. So then Rahuguna is like that. So, but due to the entanglement, he got the Yeswara Bhava and the dependence that we talked. And then Prabhu mentioned one point, like from the Bhagavad Gita 1.9, where Duryodhana said that these soldiers have given up their life for his sake. So there Prabhu mentioned that why can't we give up our life for our spiritual master? So that is a striking part that Prabhu has mentioned. So then Prabhu talked about like dharmasya hina pasvi samana. So like human beings are not defined based on the biological order, but by the following the dharma. If we don't follow dharma, look, we are like uh, same as animals. So when Rahuguna heard the philosophy talked by Jad Bharat, so he immediately appreciated that because he has that uh, knowledge. So then Prabhu talked about like all human beings are like all jivas are spiritually equal, but materially different, especially human beings. So then now human life is meant for self-relation. What is this self-relation? So Prabhu talked about the verse Brahma Bhuta Prasannatmana Sochitana Kamshati. So then Prabhu mentioned that all these instructions does not directly talk about bhakti, but these are the basic foundation for the bhakti. So then how Prabhu said like Brahmana or the Bhuteva Raja or the Nardeva and like that. And then Rahugana wanted to inquire more uh, from Jada Bharat. So this means that so he has a lot of appreciation and he wants to understand the purpose of life. So Srila Prabhupada said that in the present moment, so officials are ignorant and they don't offer obeisances, neither they appreciate the philosophy. And there, Prabhu mentioned the difference between the present government and old government. So, former kingly governments were like heaven because they understand the purpose of life, and the current governments are like hell because we don't have any of these understandings. So, any sinful person can be purified by the innate potential of bhakti, and this is the hope giving sentence for us. And the end is like when Sri Prabhu was on earth, so the instructions given in the last 3 years were of like 80% of them were the Varnashrama Dharma. So this what talks about like how important these things following Varnashrama Dharma like kingly, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra, these things. So lines are already unmuted. If anybody wants to share their own their comments or if I missed out something. Hare Krishna. So we can end the class here with the Vaishnava Nama Vancha Kalpataru Vesha Kupa Sindhu Bhevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namo Vaishnava Brunda Ki Jai Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai His Grace Mukunda Datta Prabhu Ki Jai All glories to Sri Guru Gauranga Hari Bol. Hare Krishna again. Now ending the class. So we'll again meet tomorrow at 7:15. Hare Krishna. Now ending the class.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Prabhu, that Panihatti's recording is there, Prabhu.
That I'm not aware, Mataji. I have to check with
Yeah.
archivist.
Please check, Prabhu. Amazing, Prabhu. Very nicely has given the lectures. If possible, please try, Prabhu. I would like to listen. I missed it. I could not come this time, Prabhu.
Even same thing, I also could not go.
Oh, you didn't go, Prabhu. Okay, okay.
My health was not good, so I did not go.
Okay, okay. My daughter
I
and
will check, Mataji. I will check. I will inquire, and if it is there, I will share, Mataji.
thank you, Prabhu. Dandot Pranam.